Hi guys, my name is Jim Wister, and the topic of my speech today is questioning whether street crime is worse than white collar crime. So I believe that white collar crime is actually way worse than street crime. White collar crime is less obvious, but it hurts way more people than street crime does. White collar crime is something that's more behind the scenes that you can't really see. Our media and everything portrays street crime as a really big issue, and that's just because it is so much more visible. You can see someone getting robbed. You can see someone stealing from a store. You can see these things happen on the streets or wherever they happen. You can visualize it. Whereas white collar crime is done in a much more secretive way through fraud or funneling money or deceptive business practices that is not really easily seen, but it still happens, and it actually ends up hurting way more people in the long run than street crime ever does. So in a reading, Aristotle notes that voluntary wrongdoing comes from appetite. And the appetite for greed is what causes the vast majority of white-collar crime. And both white-collar and street crime, or both white-collar and street criminals know what they are doing is wrong, but they do it either way. So the intent is the same from both street criminals and white-collar criminals. But like I said, white-collar crime really comes from greed. The motivation for the majority of white-collar crime is greed. It is estimated that anywhere from $426 billion to $1.7 trillion is stolen by white-collar criminals each year. That is a lot of money. That is more money than most of us can fathom ever even having. And the worst part about all this is that the people committing these crimes are already rich. They have no need to be stealing this much money when they're already millionaires and billionaires that are conducting these crimes. They're business owners, they're bankers, they're people who are in powerful positions who have a lot of money, yet still feel the need and have that much greed that they're still going to steal money from people, and oftentimes they steal this money from people who are less fortunate. They steal it from people who are investing in their businesses thinking that they'll one day make themselves rich, but in reality it could be a pyramid scheme, it could be fraudulent investments, and these people are stealing money from everyday people as well as other wealthy people. And despite all of this crime and that much money being stolen, the prosecution rates for white-collar crime have actually declined by over 50% in the last decade, and white-collar crime prosecutions only account for 3% of federal prosecutions each year. So these people are stealing more and more money every year, yet they are facing far fewer consequences than they had even in recent years past. So another reason that I believe that white-collar crime is worse than street crime is that, like I said, white-collar crime comes from an appetite for greed, whereas street crime is more born out of necessity. People are often stealing from stores, they're stealing food, they're stealing clothes, they're stealing money from places just because they're poor. They don't have any other option to get by sometimes. When you're in a bad financial situation, it can seem like it is impossible to get out. And sometimes when you need to get by, you have a family to feed, you need to feed yourself, you have bills to pay, you have rent to pay, you have car insurance to pay. Sometimes you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You feel like you have no way out. And when you become desperate, you do things that you know are wrong, but desperate people react in desperate ways. And sometimes that results in stealing and other things that we know what we're doing is wrong, but you need to get by. People do this out of necessity just to be able to live and get through each and every day of their lives. And there have been multiple studies done that actually show that there's a direct correlation between poverty and high crime rates, as in like street crime. That's something that, even without studies, that's pretty apparent. If you go to any major city that has a large portion of their population being impoverished, or a city that has a great deal of wealth inequality, you can see that people who are in bad situations often have to resort to crime just to get by. The way that our country was set up, they funneled it so that rich people live in one place and all the poor people get stuck in another. And those parts of cities where all the poor people are forced to live with no way out often have to resort to selling drugs or committing crimes just in order to feed themselves and their family, like I said. So despite this huge clear wealth inequality and poverty problems, the people who commit street crimes are treated way worse actually by our justice system as opposed to those already wealthy who commit white-collar crimes. And part of that is due to the fact that our justice system, it punishes poverty. When you're rich and you have means, you can pay your way out of just about any crime that you commit. And oftentimes these rich people have powerful connections, as in they know the DA, they know the prosecutors, they know the police chiefs, and they often fund these people's campaigns for things like such as like political, like for politicians in their running their races, they get these donations from powerful people who have a lot of money. People who want to become the police chief, they often receive donations from these powerful people. So then when these powerful people go on and commit crimes, they have connections to the other people who are in power who are supposed to put them in jail or punish them for these crimes, but they often don't really see as much punishment as someone who commits theft. The average jail time for someone who commits white-collar crime is only 27 months. That's just over 2 years. That is in no way a deterrent for people, once they serve their time, to come back out and commit fraud yet again. It's just kind of crazy that there are people who are facing decades to life imprisonment because they've been caught stealing multiple times. But if you can commit fraud multiple times, oftentimes your punishments don't really increase. You get sent to the jail for the same amount of time. Oftentimes you're sent to jail, but they're higher quality jails where these people get to pretty much just like hang out. They're not actually put into like a federal prison oftentimes. These are like low security prisons where they get to just basically have fun and do whatever they want. It's almost like they're not even in jail. It's almost like a mandatory vacation that they take. So it just goes to show that our justice system does not treat these criminals the same way. And due to that, it doesn't deter people from actually committing these white-collar crimes. And they're going to continue stealing millions and millions of dollars from people, knowing that there are going to be no consequences for the things that they do. So some people may argue that street crime is worse, but their main argument to that point is that street crime is more violent. And yes, there are many violent street crimes, and I am in no way condoning those. Those are not okay. But the majority of street crimes are actually non-violent. People usually are robbing and stealing, and they don't have intentions of turning violent. Sometimes things go wrong, and people, when it's trying to commit a robbery, will often turn to violence as a way to get what they want. But in no way did they intend for it to go that way. Oftentimes when things go wrong, like I said, desperate people in desperate situations react in ways that are desperate. They do whatever they need in order to survive in that moment and get by. So sometimes they will turn to violence in order to get what they need, but majority of street crime is really non-violent. So in conclusion, I believe that white-collar crime hurts way more people than street crime ever does. Crime rates in our country have actually been falling since the 90s. They are down. In New York City alone, it's down 75%, which is always talked about as being one of the hubs for crime in America. But crime in every major city all across our nation has been going down, but white-collar crime has not. They're continuing to steal millions, billions, and trillions of dollars from people, and they're not being persecuted for it. So that's where the real crime rate rising is in white-collar crime. 1 year's worth of white-collar crime, like I said, could be anywhere from about $500 billion to $1.7 trillion, is the equivalent to decades of street crime. Street crime is estimated that it costs businesses, people, whoever the victims are of the crime, about $450 million per year, which is a lot of money, but it dwarfs into comparison to that billions to $1.7 trillion that white-collar crime takes from people each and every year. So white-collar criminals make society as a whole worse for everybody, especially the poor, because like I said, these are already these people that are filthy rich, just making themselves richer and stealing money from those who are less fortunate. So in my opinion, by far, white-collar crime is way worse than street crime. It is not even debatable.